Comrades, welcome
Comrades.
back to Marxist Monday. We are here with Dr. Jim as we continue our series on One-Dimensional Man
No man.
by Herbert Marcuse. And boy, am I still jittery with excitement from the last conversation we had on this, Jim. Again, I just want to encourage people. Let me say a few words before we begin. Philosophy for the people, of course, is generalist. We cover many subjects, many works, and I understand that some series might be more appealing than others for certain listeners. What I want to encourage people to do is to assume the attitude of a true philosopher and engage with the stuff that you're not familiar with, right? If all you do is engage with the stuff that you already know or you already like or you're already good at, you gain very little from that. Right. So I want to encourage people, even if, Herbert Marcuse doesn't seem like somebody who would appeal to you, I think, and I hope, as people who have been following the series will attest, there's a lot of fruit here. Yeah. And it's been very enriching for me. I've never read this book before, Jim, and this has been a really great experience for me as well. So I just want to put that little note out there to begin with.
Yeah, on the same theme too is one at Philosophy for the People, we have an educational mission, so we're not just like what we're doing is not just an extension of our own research here, right? What we're doing is not we're very much trying not to speak into an echo chamber. We're trying to provide the highest possible quality philosophical education that we can get out, and that includes breadth, and that includes understanding even things that you and I deeply disagree with. Although I have and I think you do too, have some serious agreement with Marcuse too, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think in this process, like we've both, even though I've read the book, in the past, right? But it was mostly my distant past, like when I was back at Kent State in my master's program. I think we've discovered like how much there is that's a defense of something like classical philosophy.
Yes.
In this book, and it's going to go on in today's chapter too, like in a very explicit way, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not coming out as critical Marxists. To be clear on that. But I think we are seeing that both the critical Marxist and the traditionalist philosopher are not happy with the status quo as it stands now, especially in academia.
Yeah.
And we, at the same time, have different views of what the upshot of that is, but the same critique seems to be available to both of us and should be made by both of us. Yeah,
that's correct. And reading something like this really kind of gives you a better perspective on somebody that we're both very sympathetic with, which would be Alistair McIntyre, for example, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think before anyone approaches McIntyre's thought, go read Marcuse first.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Read Marcuse or Marx and Aquinas, and then you'll really kind of get McIntyre.
Exactly.
Now, one more quick announcement before we start to dive in here. We are beginning a new series later today, around 2:30 p.m. on Leibniz, our boy Wilhelm.
Now for something completely different.
Yeah, no, like talk about what would the conversation at the picnic be between Leibniz and Marcuse? Who knows? But we're gonna, but that would be interesting to see. So we're gonna work through his on the ultimate origination of things. So kind of taking a turn towards natural theology later. So stay tuned for that. We're gonna have a lot of fun. And also, if you haven't seen, we're starting to get these sort of smaller form highlight videos out.
Yeah.
And thanks to Olivia for being a great video editor there. And the idea there is just to kind of pull out some of the nuggets from the longer form conversations, entice the proletariat into the larger conversation. Right, Jim? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, there is a sort of self-indulgence in asking people to spend an hour, in our case, sometimes 2 hours, right?
But it's a delicious self-indulgence.
Which will include philosophical content and sometimes stories about our deceased pets too. And so,
with all due respect,
so we do think that packaging some of the stuff that we're doing into smaller bits is smart, but also we do ask that one not replace the longer form with the smaller snippets, right? Because one of the points about Philosophy for the People is that we're committed that much of philosophy cannot be boiled down to sound bites, right?
It can't work on just Twitter. However, for you, gentle listeners who want to help us grow, hopefully some of those smaller form videos will be more shareable to help you entice your friends to join us
Right.
in the larger conversation. Okay, so let's dive in, Jim.
Let's do it.
He unloads a lot in this chapter. Kind of a grumpy old man, get off of my yard type of attitude going on.
And this is why maybe I feel an affinity to it, because I'm in the get off my lawn stage of life right now, and so now this one hit pretty close to me too, because he's getting after Wittgenstein here in some ways, and Wittgenstein in many ways is one of my great philosophical heroes. I wrote my master's thesis on Wittgenstein, and in the new book there's a lot of Wittgensteinian analysis that goes on in there. And as we'll see, I think he's being perfectly fair to logical positivism and ordinary language philosophy as it was practiced at Oxford. I don't think he's
he takes a swipe at Wittgenstein.
It takes a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot. Right. So we'll do this. Okay. So as always, we go back to the table of contents. Okay. And you'll remember last time. So we're in the section of the book, One-Dimensional Thought. In chapter 5, negative thinking, the defeated logic of protest. He gave us a sense of what actual thought would be, or what it had been in what thought was in the classical period, and in his view, in a sort of renaissance of it in Hegel, before it was co-opted by the totalitarian technological mechanism of the 20th century. Okay, so chapter 5 is sort of what was the golden age of thinking, if there were one, right? And there we found much resonance, because we agreed quite a bit with his read of Hegel as this sort of transgressive dialectician. Hegel, Plato as this like transgressive dialectician. Okay, and then in chapter 6, what we got, which where the title is From Negative to Positive Thinking, Technological Rationality and the Logic of Domination, is his description of, at a grand cultural scale, what has replaced real thought, and that is technological rationality. Okay, and there we got his co-opting of the profound critiques of technological thought, that you find in Husserl later, especially later Husserl, in Heidegger, right? In a lot of these 19th and early 20th century phenomenological sources. We thought, like, to make a great point about like what is wrong with thought today, right?
Yes.
And how it's been co-opted into this totalitarian, monolithic, scientistic, operationalist, totalitarianism. Okay, and then now today we're getting the triumph of positive thinking, one-dimensional philosophy, and what he's doing is he's extending that critique of I would say like higher intellectual culture in general from chapter 6. He's going to apply it specifically to academic philosophy.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So this is Marcuse saying what he thinks is wrong with contemporary Anglo-American philosophy primarily, right? Analytic philosophy.
Yeah, in the tradition of analytic philosophy, particularly, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's saying like what is wrong with it, and why he thinks that the philosophy in the specifically British and American university has been co-opted into just being an ad hoc apologist for this, oppressive, totalitarian, technocratic thinking, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so most of which I say, here.
Indeed. I don't let me interrupt the flow if you have a way you want to proceed this, but I actually think the last 2 paragraphs in this chapter perfectly summarize what he's after.
Let's do it. Let's go there.
Let me just read them real quick and we'll start the conversation, right? I was just very struck by these. And again, I think that it's not something that certainly myself nor you, Jim, are going to have much widespread disagreement with. But Marcuse says this: a philosophy approaches this goal to the degree to which it frees thought from its enslavement by the established universe of discourse and behavior, elucidates the negativity of the establishment, capital E. Its positive aspects are abundantly publicized anyway, and projects its alternatives. To be sure, philosophy contradicts and projects in thought only. It is ideology, and this ideological character is the very fate of philosophy, which no scientism and positivism can overcome. Still, its ideological effort may be truly therapeutic, to show reality as that which it really is, and to show that which this reality prevents from being. In the totalitarian era, the therapeutic task of philosophy would be a political task, since the established universe of ordinary language tends to coagulate into a totally manipulated and indoctrinated universe. then politics would appear in philosophy, not as a special discipline or object of analysis, nor as a special political philosophy, but as the intent of its concepts to comprehend the unmutilated reality. If linguistic analysis does not contribute to such understanding, if instead it contributes to enclosing thought in the circle of the mutilated universe of ordinary discourse, it is at best entirely inconsequential. And at worst, it is an escape into the non-controversial, the unreal, into that which is only academically controversial. Kind of giggled at the last part.
Yeah. That, by the way, good find. That's exact. That, boom. Right.
Mhm.
Boom. Great paragraphs. Yeah. You know, and so I think there's in these paragraphs really hit it. And if you have something you want to comment on, by all means, stop me. But I think there's two main themes that he's doing in this chapter, and it really carries over with some of the stuff that we really nailed in the last episode. Right? Is first what he sees at what analytic philosophy is this claim that we're going to take modern logical technique that is going to be absolutely precise, right? As if no one was precise before Frege, but I mean, right, I mean, there's a lot of precision going on elsewhere. But anyway, we're going to like put a high premium on the value of clarity and precision. We're going to accept no argument, no position that cannot be translated into like first order predicate calculus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And anything that does not fit that scientific standard of rigor and precision will be dismissed as mystical, meaningless, occult nonsense.
Right. And it's important just for clarity's sake for our listeners, the distinction between something like positivism and scientism, right? So positivism is really kind of a theory about meaning, right? What has meaning, whereas scientism is there's different theories of scientism, but they're either or both theories about epistemology, what we know and how we know it, or ontology, what actually exists. So they are different. There's related elements, but they are different. And I see sometimes people conflate the two of these, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, just wanted to get that out there. Mm-hmm.
And so in this is certainly true at I think the high watermark of logical positivism that was going on when Marcuse was writing it, but it's also true today too. Is so much, if you listen to debates in contemporary analytic philosophy, it's what you're saying doesn't make any sense because I can't fit it into the rigors of modern logic, right? And that becomes this way of dismissing anything that is fundamentally critical of the contemporary scientific attitude. Right?
That's right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I think what Marcuse is very perceptively seeing here is the appeal to clarity, rigor, logical, transparency that you see in analytic philosophy, has its value. I mean, I'm a recovering analytic philosopher too. Okay.
Right.
But also when it becomes an end in its own right, Marcuse wants to know, well, why is that?
Mm-hmm.
And is that just a way of dismissing positions that are actually fundamentally metaphysically critical of the technological scientific status quo in the university?
Right. And we've spoken about that before. I think it's worth emphasizing is, it's baby bathwater type of stuff. Yeah. Of course, just like we had in our, this is a good parallel to our last conversation where we say, look, the sciences are enormously impressive and powerful, but just because they don't pick up certain aspects of reality doesn't mean that they aren't there. Right. Now that I think perfectly obvious statement, at least to me, doesn't mean that science is therefore not useful in any sense, right? So you don't want to go the other way. Well, same thing about what you just said. Like there were elements that fueled, positivistic thinking that are good, that are useful, that are good tools that we don't want to throw out. It's again, I think, a problem of turning something that's a useful method in a restricted sense into something much larger that it shouldn't be, like a metaphysics or a theory of meaning or something like that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in my own, development, the way I think of analytic philosophy is, Plato required, 10 years of geometry before you could enter the academy, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, like the 10, 15 year sojourn as an analytic philosopher was my geometry. It developed rigor of thought. But ultimately, I do agree with Marcuse here. When rigor becomes an end in itself, you have to ask yourself, what other ends are you excluding, and are they worthy?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
a famous
exactly.
example of this would be like if you hold a Fregean concept of existence, I think you're just going to always, right, like
Yeah,
always just be like very confused, and your
yeah,
worldview is always going to be inadequate. So there's certain things in some of these systems that I don't think shows that the system itself is useless. Far from it. It's just that it can't accommodate everything.
yeah,
It can't
yeah.
give us everything that we
And
want. Right. We have to be
and
more expansive. Right. Mhm.
and Marcuse in this chapter, like he shows some of his Freudian cards, and he says, look, he sees the positivists, and I would even say today, like a lot of just, and because really a lot of what goes by philosophical naturalism today
Mhm.
would be embarrassed to call itself positivism, but essentially it is positivism, right? A lot of your analytic naturalist types, he says that they're just these kind of masochists who are flogging themselves before the scientists for their approval, right? That they think that they have to show themselves worthy of being in the cool kid science club by coming up with a philosophy that couldn't.
It's a form of sexual repression.
Yeah, it's a form of no. I mean, they couldn't possibly, like, by definition, this philosophy could not call into question any kind of what's proposed as a scientific truth, right?
Mhm.
Like you think of like a lot of people will define their very method in philosophy, at, like, think of Quine, right, as naturalism, which is it's saying by its very self definition, it cannot disagree with anything a natural scientist would claim,
That's
right?
right. Mhm.
At Quay Natural Scientists. Okay. And I think Marcuse is right to say, okay, why is philosophy forfeiting its traditional role as the gadfly of Athens, right? And it's something that's come out very interestingly in the last couple of chapters. Is he sees philosophy as inherently transgressive, going back to Socrates. It's negative thinking in this sense that it calls to question what is positively present always.
It's meant
Always.
to pull you out of the cave, right?
It's meant to pull you out of the cave. And whereas analytic philosophy is not meant to pull you out of the cave, right? It's always taken, well, what is given to us by the sciences and how can we analyze it? It's just analysis. Analysis always taking what's there and breaking it into parts for the sake of clarity. The very name of it, analytic philosophy,
Mhm.
right? Like Marcuse would say, this is the defense only of the status quo, right? And if the status quo is inherently unjust, repressive, what have you, it is just now an apology for repression, right? And it's co-opting the very thing that should be, the negativity toward repression, and it's bringing it. It's the same cunning of reason that Marcuse sees everywhere. It's like the totalitarian technocratic machine adopts what should be its other right into it, right?
Right. Mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I think there is much to be said in favor of this, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, anyone who starts coming out and starts taking swipes at academic philosophy is,
Let's go, man.
yeah,
Go.
probably more likely to be in my favor than not in
Exactly.
many
Yeah,
respects. Yeah.
and once again, he's taking swipes at it in light of what he sees as the original vocation of the philosopher, and he would associate with classical philosophy, right?
Mhm.
Now he's not looking to like resurrect classical philosophy ultimately, but he's seeing that something has gone wrong in the modern period with what even philosophy is.
Right, because he does say that the historical perspective on this of being the gadfly is the valid perspective. He
Is
does
the valid
he
perspective.
does agree with that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah,
Even if he doesn't agree with the Platonic or Aristotelian worldview at large, he's like,
right.
at least
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is the kind of purpose of philosophy, right? Mhm.
right. And I'm gonna it's some when we get I want to talk about Wittgenstein in a minute here, and we'll get into like where I think I disagree with him, right? But
Yeah.
like the second major theme of the chapter. So on one, you have analytic philosophy as positivism, as naturalism, as scientific naturalism. Okay. The other hand, he talks about ordinary language philosophers like J.L. Austin, Gilbert Ryle, Wittgenstein. On some readings, or I would even say some moments of Wittgenstein, though I think there's actually a more critical Wittgenstein out there too, right? And what his claim there is okay. So they want to return us to ordinary language as a way of exercising our temptation to fall into metaphysical problems. Like I think it's
Mm.
fair to say all of those thinkers will say something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
And and in doing so, the idea is like they take ordinary speech as somehow normative, okay, as somehow pristine, right? As sort of like this Edenic there's this Edenic paradise of the common man, right? And if we could just sort of exercise our philosophical temptations and see what the meaning of things are in ordinary language, all these sort of philosophical vexations would go away, right? Okay. And I'd never noticed this before reading this book, but what his critique of that is very interesting. He's saying, well, that presumes that the speech of the ordinary person has not been manipulated by the totalitarian, right, scientific, technological machine already, right? And he says, well, the ordinary person speaks their experience now in his, when he's writing this in the mid 20th century, and we have to say in the early 21st century, is completely manipulated and mediated through, what people are told, right, to say by commercials, by social media, by television, by
propagandists, politicians,
politicians. And so to say that somehow we can return to the ordinary, and there's just this pristine, analysis waiting there to be done that will show us the actual contours of reality, and thereby eliminate from us the vexations of metaphysical philosophy. Marcuse says, well, that just sounds to me like you're getting, once again, a diffusion of any possible criticism of the order of things as it stands right now. And so that's just a tool of this totalitarian machine, right? I think that's brilliant.
It's spot on. Yeah. I think it's undeniable. Yeah. He did say it. He did. Yeah. No, you continue. You continue.
Go. Jump in.
No, because I know you wanted to say some remarks about where you part ways with him on Wittgenstein. I did think his kind of analysis of the Aristotelian concept of matter was interesting.
Yeah.
And it's just a
kind of comes out for it. It kind of comes out for it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he does. And I was trying to read that a couple of times and saying, does he get it right? I mean, he's just ambiguous enough here. You could give him a charitable read or an uncharitable read, right? But I think it is important. I'll just read it, and then we can. Are you cool with that, Jim?
Yeah, of course.
Because it does tie into what we're talking about, right? So he says the separation of science from philosophy is itself a historical event. That's definitely true, right?
True.
We know that that's true. Aristotelian physics was part of philosophy. We used to call it natural philosophy, right? And as such, preparatory to the first science, ontology. The Aristotelian concept of matter is distinguished from the Galilean and post-Galilean, not only in terms of different stages in the development of scientific method and in the discovery of different layers of reality, but also and perhaps primarily in terms of different historical projects of a different historical enterprise, which establish a different nature as well as society. Aristotelian physics becomes objectively wrong with the new experience and apprehension of nature, with the historical establishment of a new subject and object world, and the falsification of Aristotelian physics then extends backwards into the past and surpassed experience and apprehension. So, yeah, I think, there's a lot there. And I do like that he says that it becomes sort of objectively wrong, right? Kind of as a matter of just arbitrary redefinition, right? Yeah. Now, we've talked before about, again, baby bathwater. You don't throw out Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics because he was wrong on some biology, right? These are different disciplines. They're investigated with using different methods. Somebody could be off on the scientific details and spot on the normative aspects or the metaphysical aspects. And it is important to understand that, just what an Aristotelian means by matter is very, very different than what a modern physicist means by matter. And in fact, many modern physicists they themselves, you ask three modern physicists, what do you mean by matter? You'll probably get three different responses, right? Some will say it's informational. Some will say it has to be marked by a space-time point or mass or something like that. But an Aristotelian conception of matter is a very specific definition, right? It's a very specific technical term that really talks about a principle of individualization and limitation and so on. So in many respects, we're just not even talking about the same thing, right?
And never mind the fact that you and I are matter to the polis. But
yes,
it's you know what I mean? It's in different senses, yeah. Right.
So what would you want to pick out of this paragraph? Because I was stuck on this one for some reason, trying to figure out what points I wanted to draw out of it.
Well, it reminds me, and when I read that paragraph, I was waiting to cite Paul Feyerabend, but I couldn't remember if Paul Feyerabend's book Against Method predates or postdates this book, right? But Paul Feyerabend was this sort of renegade, made Thomas Kuhn look like some kind of conservative scientific realist philosopher of science. And what Feyerabend's view is like there is no single thing that is the scientific method. He can show you people fudging it. Every major scientific discovery, he claims he can like show you, well, no, the method got fudged there to make the discovery happen. Okay, so he says there is no such method. And what happens is people change the subject. And so his view is like the movement from Aristotelian physics to modern physics was a change of subject. It wasn't.
That's
right?
That's definitely right in large respect.
It's just we became interested, and Heidegger like has a lot of interesting things on his like some of his history of science stuff he does. For instance, he says, well, no, it was what interested us in nature changed. Okay, so as soon as our primary interest in nature became how do we use it to get what we want out of it, right? That then gave us a different attitude towards nature, and thereby a different physics followed from that. Okay, and so I think what Marcuse is pushing here, and I think he's following people like Feyerabend and Heidegger, right, is to say that before science, there's always something more fundamental. There's always something more fundamental in the background. There's always some other kind of commitment that is pushing us toward the set of optional scientific first principles that we're going to operate by, right? Yeah. But now also like here's the critique is by saying, well, the scientific method as it is shown up today in Marcuse's case, the 1964 Western University, is unquestionable, and anything that falls outside of that is an occult, mysterious thing, maybe a poetic truth, but by that we mean BS, right? Maybe a religious truth, but by that we mean BS, right? Well, to say that anything that falls outside of the method is to say we are just not going to allow ourselves to try to access that thing that is always before.
Yes,
right. Like that thing that is always before any kind of like first order scientific ontical commitment.
Right? All the more the case when the science becomes an actual person, as apparently it has with Dr. Fauci.
That I heard that happens. Yeah.
He is the science now. I'm so curious what Marcuse would say about that.
No, gosh, that's a great example, Pat, right? Is because now thereby like there is nothing like because we've taken science and made it the unquestionable metaphysic. Philosophy in the mainstream American university defines itself by conformity to it. That means we can never ask the fundamental philosophical questions of being, truth, and goodness anymore, independently from science. And Marcuse is saying, look, that's not philosophy, right? That is like serving the interests of the totalitarian machine.
That's right. Yeah. And you have many scientists, many good scientists, who are, of course, making this point, but they're making the point, as scientists. Marcuse is saying, no, it's much deeper here. And I think he's spot on. But man, what an interesting time we're living in, where a lot of Marcuse's points they might have been obvious back then, but they're damn obvious now.
Damn obvious. Right. There's no way you can't, like, whether it's Marcuse, it's Huxley, it's, Heidegger, it's, all these people who are writing in the 30s and then post World War II, you cannot look at these people and say, wow, you were so prescient. You were so prescient. Like you knew where this thing was going in ways that no one fathomed at the moment. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's really clear. Like those people, whatever else being described, they're getting the predictions right.
Yeah, definitely. Right. And I would lump other people in there again. Lewis, Chesterton.
Lewis, Chesterton. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even more of the pop level guys just were spot on.
Gosh, I've been given the last couple of conversations. I want to do some kind of study with my students, or maybe you're not here, where we would like get Lewis's Abolition of Man and Heidegger's Question Concerning Technology, like in a conversation, right? Because they're actually written about the same time and very interestingly similar texts. Right?
I think my two favorite works from Lewis would be Abolition and Miracles. If people ask me two works from Lewis, I would probably commend those two. I mean, Screw Tape is really funny. I think it's spiritually significant, but Abolition and Miracles were always the top two of mine from Lewis. Yeah.
I mean, I'm because I want to I think trees talk to me, and I'm trying to re-enchant nature, so I'm all for Narnia.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Well,
go.
we'll do I'll go get them from my kids' room. We'll do a series of Narnia next. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So all right. So he talks about
Jim talking to trees.
Yeah. He talks about Wittgenstein next paragraph. You
Yeah.
want to hop right to the point you want to make about that?
Okay, so and this is me turf warring here, but that's okay.
That's all right. No, we're allowed to do that. Yeah.
So I think he's right. A lot of the critique that he's applying here does apply to especially the Wittgenstein of certain moments of the philosophical investigations. Okay. And I'm not sure that it applies to the Wittgenstein of uncertainty. I'm not sure that it applies. In fact, I'm going to claim it doesn't. It applies to Wittgenstein of culture and value and some of these later writings. Okay. Or actually, some of those predate the philosophical investigation, but they came out later. But, and what I have in mind here is so Wittgenstein himself was deeply, deeply, deeply worried about the creep of technologically driven totalitarianism. Like he prefaces the philosophical investigations with this, in the darkness of our times, I doubt anybody's going to understand this book.
Yeah.
Right? And in Culture and Value, he talks about in a very, oft-cited passage about how he thinks like there's this great lie that the great progress is technological progress and not this other kind of humane progress, right? And you can see, so he himself is very, very worried about many of the same things. Now, there's an inherent kind of cultural conservatism in Wittgenstein, okay, in that he thinks that, like we talked earlier, but before we can make sense of things in an explicit scientific sense, there's always a background of accepted truths.
Yes.
Okay? There's always a background of accepted truths. And so for Wittgenstein, if we attempt to grind up everything into that analytical, conceptual, scientific, technological framework, we're going to undermine the very grounding of that itself. Okay, he thinks there is this always before we can make sense of things. There's a stream of life we're already in. There's a set of principles we're already accepting, and to try to draw all of that out and make it explicit is going to alienate us from the actual source of our sense making. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he always thinks there's this unstatable in the background.
Right.
Okay. And the attempts to state it lead to dumb philosophical puzzles, but it's there. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's a fundamental contact with something. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so for Wittgenstein, like negative thinking can only go so far. It has to stop somewhere. And there has to be a world that I occupy that goes unquestioned at some level, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I know Marcuse is not having that. There has to be complete negative thinking. Everything given has to ultimately be destroyed, right? So we can build it back better. This is the Marxist, right? This is the Marxist difference, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where like people like Heidegger depart from Marcuse. This is where people like Wittgenstein depart from Marcuse. This is where people like Husserl depart from Marcuse. Is like Marcuse wants the complete critique of everything. Nothing can ultimately just be given to us by the past. It has to all be critiqued, all undermined, so that we can then, finally get to our own constructed Eden.
Yeah. So this makes me wonder, so far as I've seen, there hasn't been a developed theory of this in this book. And I wonder if he has a developed theory anywhere, but what is his epistemology at the end of the day?
Yeah. I don't know. Interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting question. Yeah, that might be one where we could dig an essay up on sometime and check that out.
Yeah, and what could it be? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, but it's a question that's been lingering in the back of my mind, because you're right. It seems like he's going to be digging himself a pretty big epistemological hole he'll probably not be able to climb back out of with that approach, right? Mm-hmm.
And so for the Wittgensteins of the world and the Heideggers of the world, there's always going to be this tension between this sort of world of like cultural givens and even natural givens, and our need to not just be members of cults and thereby be able to step back and evaluate it. And there's no real easy answer for these people on how that's going to work, right?
Yeah,
they're gonna counsel living with the ambiguity of it, right?
That's right.
Whereas somebody like Marcuse is okay, we have to have this Hegelian Aufhebung, and just wreck everything, right? Mm-hmm. So that we can then be liberated from that history. And then thereby
build back better, baby.
Build back better, the final revolution.
It is kind of Cartesian in a sense, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But not just for the sake of knowing truth and settling disagreement, like, but for a political revolution. So that's where
Political revolution.
that's
Yeah.
where, so it's Cartesian in a sense, but not
Yeah.
entirely, right?
And this becomes like, I think the Heideggerian critique of something like Marcuse is to say, well, isn't that too techne? Isn't that technology? The idea that like we're just going to knock the whole thing down and then like we're going to like construct it the right way now. Like that seems to be like, that isn't actually ultimately transgressive of technological rationality. That's the final end of it. That's like playing itself out completely.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas someone like Wittgenstein and like Heidegger, they are fundamentally anti-revolutionary thinkers.
Yeah. That's a good point to mark. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to highlight from this chapter. I think we covered it all from my perspective, Jim. Any other summary thoughts or takeaways from this you want to listen?
That hits it. That hits it. And that for me though, like really articulates where I depart from a Marcuse type.
Right. Yeah.
And just look at like what's going on with like his though I think superficial and confused grandchildren today. It's the idea is like with the wokeness is just everything has to be like made into negative. Everything has to be criticized all the way down. Nothing can be just given, whether it's sex, gender, race, political, everything has to just be completely ripped up and deconstructed.
Right. But I mean, the great irony is they're taking the given of the Marxist stream.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
That.
and ultimately, like this is like one of my recurring themes throughout the whole series here is to say, well, but really that doesn't liberate anyone. That just turns them into like prime matter or Soylent Green, just to be consumed into the totalitarian machine. Like by completely robbing someone of any cultural traditional grounding of their thought doesn't make them free thinkers, right? It makes them prepared to be propagandized.
And that is exactly what we're seeing right now.
It's just creating a cognitive vacuum. It's not liberation. Cognitive vacuum is not liberation.
And a lot of bad things can get in a vacuum, right?
Exactly.
Including demons. So
exactly. Yeah, no, like nature abhors a vacuum, right? And
right.
So by completely undermining what fills natural human cognitive space, what we're doing is we're not liberating people. We're just preparing them to be controlled from the outside in.
That's right. And the only prime matter that we should be interested in here is the upcoming supplement line from Philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah. Once again.
Stay tuned. We're trying to find a white labeler so we can and look, guys, it will be exorbitantly overpriced, but you'll buy it and everyone will be happy.
It's like $200 a bottle.
Got to make Marcuse proud. Let's take a few comments here.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Our buddy Dwong says early morning stream. Let's go. Yeah, man. Sorry, Jim. Thanks for carrying it today, man. I am as I told Jim behind the scenes, we got the stomach flu running through the house, so I did not get a great night's sleep last night. I have not caught it yet. Yeah. So I'm one of the last Flynn standing at this point. So unfortunately, I feel it's only a matter of time. But we had the kids up last night. The wife, unfortunately, God bless her, Christine. She's stricken right now. So yeah, not all together this morning. So I thank you, Jim, for being a strong.
For some reason, the Marcuse stuff just brings out the old man rant in me, right? And I don't know if it like brings me back to my my kind of like radical lefty days back at Kent State, where this was, but here we are, right?
I love it, man. Again, I'm really getting, this is just such a good series. It's such a good series. And we're, hey, what's our motto here? Our first t-shirt will be read the damn book.
Read the damn book.
That's what we're doing. And look, again, two decided non-Marxists, hopefully showing that, where we reasonably, part ways with Marcuse. But again, I haven't been taking a tally, but I would imagine like at least 8 out of 10 times we've been kind of like agreeing with this dude, right? And there's just a lot of really good, thoughtful material in here. So
I think we have to be honest that we are a cultural minority now, right? At best case scenario, just call us a cultural minority, if not
right.
Okay, and so that means we need to read what is by design culturally transgressive thought.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I think we like, so that's why I think with the people who really have the most to benefit from Marcuse right now are like, traditional minded Catholics more than like, what we would normally think of as a radical liberal, because the radical liberals, at least in the university context, they are the man now.
That's right. That's
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Right. Yeah. Marcuse is ours now.
He's ours. No, he's more. I think he's more ours than he's theirs now. Yeah.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Good stuff. Let's take a question or comment here.
Yeah.
Andrew says,
Yeah.
given that we are not critical theorists, what are we to make of those like Jeffrey Nichols? That's Jeffrey L. Nicholas. Sorry, he clarified, who tries to wed McIntyre and critical theory together. I have to plead ignorance. I'm not familiar with his work.
I don't know Nichols, but I mean, I think McIntyre. I mean, like once again, in McIntyre's most recent book, probably his last book, he basically says the two people we should be reading are Aquinas and Marx, because he thinks Marx provides us with an attunement to these kinds of considerations that did not, the notion of propagandizing totalitarianism does not occur to anybody right before the 19th century, because just the technological means are not there to do it. Okay. And so Marx or McIntyre does see some acquaintance with Marxism in its critical side. Something like what we're getting in One-Dimensional Man is actually essential, right, for our understanding our position, right, and ultimately making a case for the positive thing. And then McIntyre's not he's not a Marxist, so it's not all just negative thought all the way down. There's a positive thought too, and he draws that from Aquinas and Aristotle. Okay, but I have not read this person's works. I don't know exactly what he's saying, but I would not be surprised if he's actually getting something right in McIntyre. One thing we should commit to doing before, after we finish this series, is we should read McIntyre's essay on Marcuse.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And that's another one I haven't looked at in years and years and years. I would love to go back to that now.
Yeah. There's one that it's been a while since I've read it, but it's this essay on pre-philosophical thought. Which one am I thinking of? That one was always struck me as being a superb essay.
Yeah.
I'll dig it up, but that one, one of our listeners might remember which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, he has,
and he does develop a philosophy of mind in it as well. A very Aristotelian one, of course. I'll find it, because that would be a fun one to put in the queue too.
Yeah.
Catholic Basia says a comment. He says, "Thankfully, positivism is also self-defeating." It's interesting how you have these kind of big ideas that do fail to meet their own standard or solve the branch they're sitting on, or however you want to put it, self-referentially incoherent. I mean, everything from arguably classical foundationalism, and now we have scientism and positivism. But
I would prefer to describe positivism as fideistic, because it would be self-defeating if it claimed its authority on its own. Okay,
that's always the way out for these things. So they can say, well, we're restricting the domain we think the standard applies to, and we're exempting ourselves, right? So you can always kind of do that, right, to try and get out of the self-defeat issue, right?
I think what they're doing, they're exempting themselves on the basis of the dogmatic authority of the physics department.
Right. So then, if it's not self-defeating, then it really is just question begging your bare assertion. So it still doesn't get around the fundamental issue, right?
It's dogmatic fideism is what it is. Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it, right? And you do see that move a lot. We'll be like, well, I don't mean to. This doesn't apply to everything. It just applies to just this. Oh, okay. Well, you still need to support your position, buddy. Then, right. So what do you got, right? Right. All right. Buddy Dwong here says, "Last man standing." Yeah, pray. Hey, man, if you don't mind a quick Hail Mary or something, I would appreciate it.
That's right. Yeah, I find when these stomach bugs get in a big family like mine, like yours, Pat, it's like it becomes like an Agatha Christie novel, right? Where the characters start disappearing one by one, right? And then
it's kind of fun until it gets you, right? Like I remember last year around this time, it was me and Mira. Mira's my oldest daughter, and everyone else went down. And so like, all right, who's it gonna be, Mira? Who's gonna win?
I tell you what,
I lost.
We had a stomach bug go through our house last spring when Will was home on leave, right? And it was like old time's sake, like Will's home, so everybody got a stomach bug, right? And everybody got it, but Martha and Jack, they made it through without ever getting it. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Wow.
It was like 2 week. It was like 2 weeks drawn out.
Incubation.
I was the last one to get it, and I think it's been 10 months, and I still think Martha and Jack are worried that they might get it. So.
Yeah, I don't care how tough of a guy you are. When this stuff will bring you to you. This will bring you down, man.
Yeah. I mean, my son Will is a 6 foot, 220 pound United States Marine, and this thing knocked him out. We have a stain on the rug to remember him by right now.
Duong says, I was talking to my priest and he was saying one problem with many strict observant Thomists is they don't engage with the culture, whereas St. Thomas would engage with everyone during his time. I mean, this is something Jim and I complain about
Let's
a
go.
lot.
Yeah, let's go.
And I mean, where do you want to start, man? One of my issues with a number of even just, professors who are Thomists is they really do kind of live in their own little bubble. And it just infuriates me when they're demanded or asked a question from somebody to engage seriously with a cultural issue or a philosophical issue that is just kind of outside strict Thomism, and they just got nothing. And they just have nothing. And it's like, that is so not the spirit of Aquinas, right? So yeah, I mean, I could rant about this for hours, but I agree. So Jim.
Yeah, and also I think you find very often in Catholic contexts, right, these kind of like good guy, bad guy histories of philosophy, right? Where this kind of set them up, shoot them down, sort of, I'm teaching this to show you the errors in these other views, not that I'm like legitimately open to what I could be taught by this text, right? Everything becomes winner and loser, good guy, bad guy in a rigged game to like get us to what we see as the truth, right? And I think you can be legitimately open to other texts without actually doubting your own position in the first place.
100%. I want to highlight that, right? Because like I had the secular for my undergrad, and then I had the Catholic for the master's. Now, let me give a good shout out to Holy Apostles for my master's. I feel that they did a fair job with the shoot 'em down. Now, look, it's still shoot 'em down. I'm gonna be honest. Like, it was clearly this was a Thomistic program, no doubt. But we were required to engage with the primary texts, right, and to excavate, resources and insights, and a good to me, a good master's program forces you to do that. If your master's program, any philosophy program that's not forcing you to engage with the primary text is honestly, I think you're just being scammed at that point.
Yeah, I agree.
My undergrad secular, the reason I didn't major in philosophy undergrad is because it was straight propaganda. It was just straight propaganda nonsense. I mean, and like I could see this when I was a more I was libertarian at the time, more liberal leaning on a lot of stuff. I was not religious, and it was straight propaganda for me even back then. Right?
Yeah, this goes on all sides. Everyone's doing this.
Right. So definitely the master's was a far better education, but I want to highlight the point that Jim is making, and it is a legitimate one. Is sometimes you do in a number of these programs get these kind of cartoonish, here's the bad guy, here's how St. Thomas refutes him. Now, like, come on, it's a little more nuanced than that, right?
and take McIntyre as a good example of that. He's like, he's saying like the marks of Das Kapital is it has something to add to, McIntyre is a very, very committed Thomist, has something to add to the Thomists' understanding, because there are problems in the modern situation that Thomism is ill-equipped to deal with because they would have never occurred. Right. To St. Thomas himself. Okay. And there's been a game change. Right.
And this is why I've always admired somebody like Norris Clark. Right. He's about the kind of creative completion or the creative retrieval. Right. And, he gets flack from people because I guess he's not strict observance. Right. But in a sense, I don't know how much I am like the exegetical stuff of like, this is what St. Thomas believed has always been, I guess, less important to me than what the correct and what seemingly true position is to me, right? Like, okay, if this is what Thomas believed, great. If not, then I'm going to be willing to part with St. Thomas on certain issues, right? Because he's not one the church, and he himself would not have claimed to be infallible, right? So, yeah. Anyways, none of that's to say, like, I love Thomas, right? He's my favorite thinker of all time. He's got some close rivals, don't get me wrong. But Duong, you bring up an important point that I think we could dedicate a whole episode to at some point.
Definitely.
Duong says, speaking of Norris Clark, I am going to buy his One in the Many later today and start reading that. Yeah, excellent introduction to Thomistic metaphysics, which Duong, I know you're already familiar with. I have to recommend as well, though. I'm trying to see if it's lying around here. I think it's upstairs. His exploration in metaphysics. That is a phenomenal collection of essays. So definitely. And he's also got a short book called The Philosophical Approach to God. And he has a lot of engagement with process philosophers there, which is funny because a lot of these sort of neo-personal I'm sorry, neo-theists or theistic personals, like they're just resuscitating a lot of the thought of process theists, and
Exactly.
which is what you see in these, something has been forgotten that was hashed out 30 years ago, and it just gets cycled over again. So you might find that one from Clark interesting as well. Anyway.
Yep.
All right, Jim, final thoughts before we close this out?
No, I think we had a good rant. Right. Yeah. Looking forward to doing some Leibniz this afternoon.
Yeah. All right, gentle listeners, mark it down. So let it be written. So let it be known.
Let it be known.
2:30 p.m. Central Time. We're going to be live talking through Leibniz's ultimate origination of things, which is cool because it's going to introduce us to his contingency argument and also his very interesting theodicy as well. So we're going to be working through that. Definitely. Sweet.
And as always, remember the revolution will not be televised, right? If it's on TV, it's not the revolution.
But it will be live streamed, and we'll catch you at 2:30.
It'll be live streamed here at Philosophy of the People.
Peace.
Peace.